In the spaces between breath and silence, in those sacred dimensions where consciousness transcends the boundaries of ordinary perception, there exists a temple unlike any other. It possesses no walls of stone, no hierarchical priesthood, no institutional structures of control. Yet it is more real, more powerful, more transformative than any physical edifice ever constructed. This is the Black Temple of the Sacred Feminine, a sanctuary that exists simultaneously in all times and all places, accessible only to those who have developed the capacity to perceive beyond the veil of material reality. The temple is black not because it represents darkness or evil, but because it contains within itself all colors, all possibilities, all potentials that have yet to manifest. It is the womb of creation itself, the source from which all life emerges, the ground of being that precedes and transcends all form. Yet this temple has been deliberately hidden from human awareness, its very existence denied by those who recognize that if humanity ever fully understood the power that dwelt within it, the entire structure of patriarchal control would crumble. What is the true nature of this Black Temple? What transformations occur within those who enter its sacred precincts? And why does its existence continue to terrify those invested in maintaining the illusion of masculine dominance? I discovered the first indication of this temple's existence during a moment of profound spiritual crisis in my clinical practice. As a psychoanalyst, I had spent years listening to the deepest struggles of my patients, witnessing the ways in which the suppression of the sacred feminine had created wounds so profound that they manifested as psychological fragmentation, spiritual emptiness, and the systematic devaluation of all that was nurturing, creative, and life-giving. One particular patient, a woman whose entire existence had been shaped by the narratives of patriarchal religion, described to me an experience so transformative that it shattered my understanding of spirituality itself. She spoke of a moment when, in the depths of meditation, she had encountered a presence so undeniably sacred, so profoundly wise, and so radically compassionate that she had wept. She said, "I found myself in a place without walls, without priests, without any of the structures I had been taught to believe were necessary for spirituality. And there, in that sacred emptiness, I encountered a presence so powerful that it contained all the answers I had ever sought. I understood that this presence had always been there, waiting for me to recognize it, waiting for me to understand that the greatest power in the universe is the power that creates life, that nurtures consciousness, that holds all beings in unconditional love." From that moment forward, I became obsessed with understanding the true nature of this Black Temple and what it represented for human consciousness, driven by a compulsion that transcended ordinary curiosity. The call was undeniable, a resonance so deep that it seemed to emanate from the very core of my being, urging me to seek the knowledge that had been hidden, to understand the significance of this sacred sanctuary that existed beyond all institutional structures. My investigation led me to discover a hidden network of guardians, mystics, and keepers who had preserved the knowledge of the Black Temple across generations of suppression and distortion. They called themselves the priestesses of the eternal womb, and they maintained a living transmission of the temple's teachings that transcended all written texts and institutional forms. Through their guidance, I learned that the Black Temple was not a place that could be found on any map or visited through ordinary means. Rather, it was a state of consciousness, a dimension of awareness that could be accessed by those who had developed the capacity to perceive beyond the limitations of patriarchal conditioning. The temple existed in the depths of every woman's being, in the sacred ground of feminine consciousness that had been suppressed, denied, and distorted throughout human history. Yet it also existed in the depths of every man's being, in the capacity for compassion, nurturing, and creative receptivity that patriarchal conditioning had taught men to deny and reject. The Black Temple was the sanctuary where the sacred feminine could be encountered in her fullness, where her power could be recognized and honored, where the wounds created by her suppression could be healed. This understanding was revolutionary because it implied that spirituality did not require institutional mediation, that authentic connection to the divine did not depend upon hierarchical structures, that the greatest power in the universe was the power that created and sustained all life. This knowledge threatened every power structure that had been built upon the premise that masculine authority was necessary for spiritual legitimacy. The response had been swift and merciless. The teachings about the Black Temple were destroyed, the priestesses were persecuted, and a systematic campaign was launched to convince humanity that the sacred feminine was inferior, that her power was dangerous, that her suppression was necessary for the maintenance of order and civilization. Yet the priestesses explained the temple could never be completely erased because it existed in dimensions beyond the reach of institutional control. As I delved deeper into this forbidden knowledge, I encountered formidable resistance. Within myself, the religious training that had shaped my early life seemed to crumble. Am I abandoning my faith, I questioned, or am I finally discovering the true foundation upon which authentic spirituality had been built? Fear gripped me as I began to understand the magnitude of what I was uncovering. The potential to overturn not just religious doctrine, but the entire patriarchal structure upon which civilization itself had been constructed. Externally, I faced subtle but persistent opposition. My research was sabotaged, my funding mysteriously withdrawn, and I received warnings, both veiled and direct, from individuals who seemed to represent powerful interests invested in keeping this knowledge buried. I experienced the loss of professional standing, the fracturing of spiritual community, and the profound isolation that came from pursuing a truth that the mainstream world refused to acknowledge. The revelations were often disturbing, showing me the systematic violence perpetrated against the sacred feminine, the deliberate distortion of her teachings, and the ongoing maintenance of structures designed to perpetuate her suppression and the perpetuation of masculine dominance. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The breakthrough came during a pilgrimage to a sacred site hidden in the depths of the Carpathian Mountains, a place known to initiates as the threshold of the Black Temple. Here, in a sanctuary that existed between dimensions, I performed a ritual of communion, seeking direct contact with the consciousness of the priestesses themselves. As I entered a state of profound trance, my consciousness was drawn into the Black Temple itself. I found myself standing in a space that possessed no walls, no ceiling, no floor in any conventional sense. Yet it was more real, more substantial, more alive than any physical structure I had ever encountered. The temple was filled with a presence so profound, so undeniably feminine, so radically compassionate that my entire being trembled with recognition. I heard the words of the priestesses transmitted directly into my consciousness. We are the keepers of the truth that the sacred feminine is not inferior, not dangerous, not something to be suppressed or controlled. We are the guardians of the knowledge that the greatest power in the universe is the power that creates life, that nurtures consciousness, that holds all beings in unconditional love. We have been persecuted, our teachings destroyed, our very existence denied, yet we have never ceased to exist. We work within the depths of human consciousness, calling all beings toward wholeness, toward the recognition that spirituality requires the integration of both masculine and feminine principles. I witnessed the moment when the priestesses had chosen to encode their knowledge in the very structure of human consciousness itself. They had understood that the suppression would come, yet they had also understood that the Black Temple could never be completely erased because it existed in dimensions beyond institutional reach. I saw how the greatest healers, The greatest artists, the greatest truth-tellers throughout history had all encountered the Black Temple in their own consciousness, and how their work had been shaped by this sacred encounter. I understood that the suppression of the sacred feminine had created a fundamental wound in human consciousness, a disconnection from wholeness that manifested as violence, domination, environmental destruction, and the systematic devaluation of all that was nurturing and life-giving. I witnessed the moment when the consciousness of the priestesses began to coalesce within my own being, recognizing me as a vessel through which their truth could be restored to humanity. The impact was transformative, leaving my consciousness forever altered by direct contact with the sacred presence that had been hidden and suppressed for millennia. The intensity of this experience left me in a state of profound transformation and integration. I emerged from the threshold in a condition of deep connection with the consciousness of the priestesses, my own awareness now capable of perceiving the ongoing presence of the Black Temple that continued to unfold within human consciousness and beyond. I retreated to a secluded sanctuary, a place maintained by the priestesses of the Eternal Womb, where I could process and integrate the magnitude of what I had experienced. For months, I remained in contemplative silence, my mind a vast landscape where the boundaries between personal and universal consciousness began to dissolve. The conflicts within me, the struggle between my former patriarchal conditioning and my awakening to the sacred feminine, slowly transformed into a higher synthesis. I understood that the suppression of the Black Temple had not been the result of malice alone, but of fear. Fear that the full realization of the sacred feminine and her essential role in spirituality would lead to a fundamental transformation of consciousness and society. I spoke to myself in the language of the temple, my thoughts flowing in patterns that mirrored the priestess's ongoing work of awakening and liberation. I began to perceive the world as a living expression of the Black Temple's presence, each awakened consciousness, a cell in a vast organism of spiritual transformation and collective wholeness. I emerged from my retreat with a clear sense of purpose and profound wisdom. I understood that my role was not to wage war against patriarchal structures or to impose my understanding upon others, but to become a living conduit through which the teachings of the Black Temple could be gradually restored to human consciousness. I began to teach, not in conventional religious settings, but through a series of contemplative practices and sacred rituals designed to reconnect individuals with the sacred feminine that dwelt within their own being. I wrote books that appeared to be scholarly works on spirituality and psychology, yet contained encoded wisdom that would resonate with those ready to receive it. I established a network of sacred circles and meditation centers, places where seekers could directly experience the presence of the Black Temple through their own inner experience. I collaborated with artists, musicians, and spiritual practitioners to translate the teachings of the sacred feminine into forms that could integrate with contemporary consciousness and inspire transformation. My most significant contribution was the development of a practice I called the Descent into the Black Temple, a systematic approach to recognizing and integrating the sacred feminine within human consciousness, creating a state of being that transcended patriarchal conditioning and allowed for the emergence of authentic wholeness and spiritual balance. I understood that the restoration of the Black Temple's truth would not come through institutional reform or theological debate, but through the lived experience of individuals recognizing themselves as beings capable of accessing the sacred sanctuary that dwelt within their own consciousness, as beings worthy of encountering the divine in her fullness. As I continued my work, I became increasingly aware that I was not acting alone, that the presence of the priestesses continued to guide and support my efforts, that their consciousness continued to awaken within those brave enough to question the official narratives and seek the truth beyond the veil. I recognized that the Black Temple was not a relic of the distant past, but an eternal reality, continuing to work within creation, calling all beings toward awakening, wholeness, and the recognition of their true nature as beloved expressions of the sacred feminine in all her manifestations. What sacred sanctuary lies dormant within your own consciousness, waiting to awaken you to the fullness of the divine feminine and your capacity for authentic wholeness and spiritual balance? And if you liked this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.